For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner joins me for Suttner's View, a weekly commentary on South Africa's political scene. Welcome, Raymond.
Thank you.
Now, this month is Heritage Month. What do you think we should be focusing on?
You know, heritage is quite a controversial and complex thing in South Africa because you have legacies which are very partisan legacies, like the Patriarchy monument or some specific things of the ANC, but they are nevertheless, I believe, part of our national heritage. And when we mark this month, I think it's important that we must understand that something is part of your heritage, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's part of liberating people or part of oppressing people. And I think when we celebrate heritage, we must understand that heritage can be celebrated from the top, in other words, from the oppressors, or from the bottom, the ordinary people who have been under the heel of the oppressors. And I think one of the elements of heritage that belongs to all South Africans is the question of patriarchy. And it would be appropriate for us not just to view patriarchy during Women's Month, but to view patriarchy and gender equality throughout the year or gender inequality as a legacy that has been with us throughout South African history, and a legacy that belongs to all who live in South Africa, because it's not a peculiarly African or white or Indian or coloured experience. It's something across the board. And I think that in examining patriarchy, we need to understand its complexity. It doesn't only affect women adversely, it affects men as well, because patriarchy designates what are appropriate ways of conduct, not just for women, but also for men. So the scope that I can have for personal fulfillment as a man may well run into conflict with what is marked out as appropriate conduct for men. You know, men mustn't be sissies, they must be tough and things like that. Equally, the notion of how women should conduct themselves relates to what is the public sphere and what is the private sphere, and men are supposed to be in the public sphere defending women, but also doing heroic or important things, and women look after the home. But it would be wrong to see this as an unconditional phenomenon. For example, all women are women, but some women are in a position to outsource some of the duties that patriarchy sees them as having to fulfill. If you have sufficient wealth, and initially it was mainly white people, but now there's a growing black middle class who can hire domestic workers to do some work. But that doesn't mean that women are entirely freed from the role of homemaker, because if something goes wrong and the domestic worker doesn't do things properly, it is the right of the man under patriarchal notions to chide her for not carrying out her duty while he works so hard to bring home the bread for the family and all of that.
How do you think gender equality can best be advanced then?
See, we're living in a very different time now. In the past, I would have said that we operated in a situation where people had to challenge patriarchy under a legal system which did not grant gender equality. And consequently, we have, amongst the legacies, amongst the heritage, we have very important histories of resistance that need to be celebrated. So it's not only a case of recognizing the oppression of patriarchy and the denial of gender equality, but it's also important that we need to celebrate the resistance. Now, people tend to focus on the 1956 march, but there was, for example, a march in 1913 in Bloemfontein when women said, "We have done with pleading, we now demand." And they went to jail in very difficult conditions. So there was rightlessness in general, but there was rightlessness in regard to patriarchy, or general approval of patriarchy. Now we're in a different situation. We have a legal system which pledges gender equality, which says it is illegal to commit gender-based violence, etc. But we know that not all parts of the Constitution, not all laws are enforced with as much fervency as others. For example, if you are subject to racist abuse, it is likely that there will be a prosecution. But when a husband beats a wife and she goes to the police station, they may well say, and they do very often say, it's a family matter. So we need to strengthen the legal basis for gender equality by using social power. There used to be powerful women's organizations after 1990. Because the ANC came back, a lot of organizations dissolved themselves. They treated the ANC Women's League as the primary organization. It's important now that we organize widely in as many spheres as possible. Now, patriarchy doesn't only affect women, it also affects sexuality, but I would like to deal with that on another occasion if we can.
Now, you refer to patriarchal domination and gender having a meaning that is different to people at different times. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, I think you get a clue from reading Nelson Mandela's autobiography and some of his statements where he chides himself. He says, "I was not there as the head of the household to defend my family." And what is interesting about this is Mandela, the notion of honor, which he is actually drawing on, is also a notion of benevolent patriarchy, because the notion of protection can be associated with chivalry, with women as decorative accompaniments, where the man is cast in the role of the valiant defender. Now, Mandela is not casting himself in that way. What he is doing is acting in a situation where his family, especially Winnie, experienced real oppression and victimization, and he was not there to defend them. And so we have to understand that patriarchy takes on a number of different meanings. In the work that I did on the ANC Underground, I explained how when the police came to arrest a daughter, father wanted to defend her, and she said, "No, Tata, just let them go. I'll come back one of these days." And the father had a sense of disempowerment because he wasn't able to protect his daughter. So the notion of protection, which is associated with patriarchy, has a different meaning in different times. And I think we need to recognize this, just as we say, not all women are located in the same way, not all men act out patriarchy in the same way, but we need, in this month, I think, to interrogate the meanings of patriarchy and ways of pushing it back and eradicating it in the long run. And that, in my view, is not a question of just going to court, which is very expensive, but also building social power.
Thank you for your insight. That was Professor Raymond Suttner speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about South Africa's heritage and gender.